I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, I'm sure you've seen this story, right? Some of the biggest names in comedy are performing at the Riyadh Comedy Festival right now. We are talking Dave Chappelle and Bill Burr and Kevin Hart, Aziz Ansari, Pete Davidson. At the same time, though, right now you have other comedians who are calling them out for selling out to the Saudi regime. For example, I want you to hear Mark Maron.
From the folks that brought you 9/11, 2 weeks of laughter in the desert. Don't miss it. I mean, the same guy that's going to pay them is the same guy that paid that guy to bonesaw Jamal Khashoggi and put him in a suitcase. But don't let that stop the yucks. It's going to be a good time.
Only Mark Maron could do that. Okay, but here's the thing. The comedy festival story is interesting. However, it's actually a part of something that is much bigger. This is really a story about how Saudi Arabia is exerting its power and its influence by spending billions of dollars in the world of culture and the expansion of that Saudi soft power. Alyssa Mercante is here, Shireen Ahmed is here, and I'm really delighted to get into this with both of you. Welcome to the show, friends.
Thank you.
Hi.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about here, and I just want to maybe start off by giving a bit of context that people need. First of all, you grapple with the story because this is the first time that that Riyadh has hosted this comedy festival. You've got 50 comedians performing over a period of 2 weeks. It wraps up this Thursday, but here's the thing. There isn't a lot of objective reporting, shall we say, coming out of Saudi Arabia. So instead, you're going to have to take the comedian's word for it. So what I want you guys to hear is Bill Burr. Here's Bill Burr talking about his time doing stand-up in Saudi Arabia. It's a bit of a longer clip, but I just want you to hear this.
So I go up on stage and everything's going good. And I'm not going to lie to you. I'm checking out the diplomats as I'm doing this stuff and they're all fucking laughing. All right, so I'm going to push a little farther. And all of a sudden I start getting in the zone. Well, Billy's feeling loose up there. And then the other part of my brain goes, don't do that. And then I said, I'm going to do it. So I started doing the joke and it murdered. They all loved it. And at that point I was just like, fuck it. I'm just doing my act. So I did my act, did the whole thing. And it was just this great exchange of energy, right? So at one point, they know their reputation. So, they were, extra friendly. They wanted to it was so funny. So I'm doing this bit talking about how I make my kids breakfast every day. And part of the joke is I go through really quickly the recipe for a Dutch baby. And I just went through the recipe. Obviously, that's not funny. But when I finished saying the recipe, it got an applause break. And I said, all right, you guys, I get it, okay? You're trying to make us feel welcome as Americans. You don't have to go that far. You literally just applauded a recipe, and they all died laughing for me calling them out on it. And it was a mind-blowing experience, definitely top 3 experiences I've ever had. And to be a part of the first comedy festival over there in Saudi Arabia, I think it's going to lead to a lot of positive things. So there you go.
Okay, so that's a moment from Bill Burr's podcast, and top 3 experiences that I've ever had is watching your faces as you were sort of listening to Bill Burr explain what he was like for him to perform in Riyadh. Shireen, I'm going to start with you. That sounded like a great time, I suppose. What occurs to you as you listen to him describe his experience performing in Riyadh?
So part of me is there needs to be a huge amount of critical analysis in terms of what he's saying. I'm all for laughs. I'm delightful.
Yeah.
I like laughing.
Big laugh guy. Yes.
Alyssa loves laughing. Yeah. We like laughing.
Yeah.
Despite that we're invited for this topic. But the reality is that while he's talking about something, he is basically telling on himself. His how he thinks Saudi people are very different from the regime. Okay, so those are 2 things. We do need to establish that first. The people are different from who's in control. And then he's like, they're making me feel welcome. Sure, we understand Eastern cultures want to make people welcome, but also his own impression of what people will be in that society is mean, anti-American, anti-human, anti-rights, all these things. So he's basically being like, I had a great time. Listen, if your top time was telling jokes in Saudi Arabia, you can do that on Bloor Street. I just sort of feel like the bar is really low here. So, and I'm I actually don't think a Dutch baby recipe is funny at all. So I just feel bad for the people in the audience feeling like that to make him feel welcome. I'd be like, nah, son, this is, no.
Go with the better act, Bill. There is an element of did you expect that there wouldn't be laughter? Did you expect that every person in the audience would be a member of the regime? There was that. Some of that was going through my mind. But then on the other end of the spectrum, Alyssa, there is this other conversation that is happening on this side, which is like we heard Mark Maron off the top of the show, right? Like there are critics who are calling out these comedians for performing in Riyadh at all. They just accepted a lot of money to perform there. What are those critics? What is the point that those critics try to make?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think there are some comedians who performed there that no one is surprised about at all. Kevin Hart has never turned down a questionable check, whether it's a gambling site or a bad video game movie.
Does it clear? Then great.
Yeah,
Kevin's there.
Then it's there.
Yeah.
But like if Shane Gillis is turning down your check, it feels like we're indie upside down.
Shane Gillis was one of the people who called out the comedians who went to perform in Saudi Arabia.
He did.
Yeah.
And Shane Gillis was also, I believe, fired from SNL for unearthing like a horrifically racist Asian joke that he did years ago. So we're living in a weird world. But I think the critiques are pretty consistent, that if you're going to a country for a comedy festival and there's rules on what you're allowed to say, it's like playing a soccer game where you're not allowed to shoot on goal. It just feels a little weird and sort of antithetical to what comedy is in the first place. And I think that's one of the main critiques is if you really are a comedian who values comedy, that you can't really go somewhere where they're saying you're not allowed to make fun of this or that. And then there's obviously the conversation about, where the money is coming from. The festival runs during the 7th year anniversary of the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi. And we are now we're there in a society where a Saudi comedian's wife was arrested for driving. And so I think that the critiques are about a country that has a history of jailing dissenters and critics. And you're going there and accepting a almost obscenely large amount of money, and a kind of money that people have pointed out makes you wonder, where is this coming from and why am I taking it? I saw someone say, if you find $20 on the ground, cool. If you find a bag of money under a park bench, don't touch that, because that you don't know what that's for, and it's probably obtained in questionable ways. And I think that's kind of the main line of critique here.
But I mean, okay, it's one thing to say Kevin Hart will just accept any check, but like Dave Chappelle, I think like one of the legendary turns of his career was walking away from an obscene amount of money because he was like, my principles state that I will not be doing this. And then to sort of see this turn, I was surprised to see his name, on the list. Do you think, Alyssa, any of these comedians care about this criticism?
I mean, Bill Burr's sort of very strange, glowing top 3 experiences of my life thing is just so out of character for him as well. I mean, this is a guy who 5 months ago was railing against selfish and greedy CEOs, and he's just taking money from selfish and greedy CEOs on the other side of the world. So that's really strange. But I think we've learned, or at least I've learned in the past 6 to 8 months, that I don't think there is any check that people will turn down if it's big enough. I mean, like Pete Davidson, whose father died during 9/11, said that, he saw the route and he saw the number and he went. It literally just said, wow. I saw where I was supposed to go. I saw how much money it was and I went. And I think that speaks volumes. And even Chappelle, apparently joking about this and about how the United States is actually worse in terms of being able to speak freely, I think is the closest we'll get to somebody making any sort of comment about this while they're at the festival. And even then it was, by all accounts, pretty tame.
Okay, so this is where we start to make the pivot from, the festival is the initial story, but it's actually about part of a larger story because, Shireen, we're talking about a lot of money, right? We're talking about a lot of money, and like Saudi Arabia has been spending a lot of this money. Why would they want all these American comedians to perform there in the first place? Like Bill Burr is like, yeah, okay, I'm happy to go there. Kevin Hart, happy to go there. Help us understand Saudi Arabia's bigger strategy. Why do they want to spend this money on, famous Americans performing there?
Well, first of all, nobody ever offers me any money. And I'm like, who do I talk to about that?
Yeah, who do we call?
I want to have these problems.
Who's that person? Let's make that call.
But the reality is that this is part of a tradition that the Saudi regime has of whether it's laugh washing, if you can call it that, comedic washing.
You just coined it just now, and I love it. I'm on board.
Sport washing, game washing in a multitude of different areas. And what it does is it brings wider mainstream culture, global culture, to Saudi Arabia to kind of be like, hey, friends, like, not can we sit at the pool table? We're going to build a whole new pool table out of like gold. Come sit here. Like, that's what it feels like. And it's also a validation of sorts of their participation. And not only can we, because what I would be more interested in is local comedians from Saudi Arabia. That would really, for me, be like, okay, wait a minute, this is kind of interesting, but has that happened instead of bringing everybody over? Fostering those kinds. But even the principle, as Alyssa said, that's not even happening. You can't criticize. What's the first thing comedians do? They look at politicians, they look at society, they look at people in power or people that are influencers or popular, and they go at them. Yeah. You can't do that there. So it's a broken system. It's not a system that's supposed to or expected to work in that way. And the reason they bring them over is for flash. I mean, I've been to Saudi. It's like reminds me of Las Vegas. That's it, which is
That's how much money's sort of around.
The holiest city in the world reminds me of Vegas.
That's genuinely, honestly, a whole other separate conversation that I want to return to. But I just want to remind people for anyone who's not reading the Human Rights Watch reports, what's the question mark? What's the question mark for anybody who's like, you know what, why would Saudi Arabia want to improve its image in the first place, might you say?
Okay, so I love this question.
Yeah,
I'm so glad you're asking me.
Yeah.
The thing is that there's twofold here. One, absolutely human rights reports, but not only that, testimonies of people of families who have either been like the descent of journalists that have been jailed, like they have a horrific history of jailing people
for being critical of the regime. Yeah.
Not even critical, reporting. Like, I don't even count that for journalists who are practicing journalists. That it's not a crime. Yeah. You have to be able to do that. Any society that doesn't have a free working press is a problem. Hello, America. Anyways, but that's truly what it is in that way. And the reason they want to do that is like, okay, yeah, we were really bad with women for a long time. They weren't allowed to enter stadiums or drive or participate or travel even without having approval of a male family member or have them travel. But let's bring Dave Chappelle over. I don't understand how the math, it's not mathing. So having to do the egregious crimes, literally it's criminalized to be part of LGBTIQ 2S+ community. You can't even do that. Like, speaking out, I'm concerned about so many things there. But then at the same time, they're like, hey, I do have to make the point, they are investing in places that aren't investing in. And I do hesitate. Part of me is like, I feel icky saying this, but the fact is they're putting money into arts and culture and sports for women in places that weren't necessarily done before and still aren't done on a global level because they have the bags.
The idea of Saudi Arabia as a place that has the bags is like, that's super central to this entire conversation. What you end up doing with that and what it makes, the idea that like, people think of a different thing because of where they're spending that money than all of those violations and all of the suppression of journalists. You start thinking of Saudi Arabia as the place that funds a whole bunch of different institutions, and like that's where it gets a little bit problematic. That's the suffix you were using, this idea of washing, whether it's sport washing or laugh washing, as you just coined. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Shireen Ahmed is here, and Alyssa Mercante is here, and we're talking about this idea of Saudi soft power and the ways that it's showing up, because there's a lot of Saudi Arabia money that is just kind of, they're spending a lot of the money courting a lot of different cultural institutions. Alyssa, a couple of weeks ago, it was announced, WWE said WrestleMania 2027 is headed to Riyadh, and then there's all these stories, all these sports teams that, Saudi Arabia keeps buying. They bought Newcastle United, which not the team that I would have bought, but anyway, neither here nor there. But the big...
Hey, I used to live there.
But fine, we'll allow it. I think the big story, I think, that helps us understand all of this is the fact that, like, it's this new deal, right? This new deal where the purchase of one of the world's biggest video game companies, which is Electronic Arts. This past week, Saudi Arabia's public investment fund announced its plan to buy EA. That's gigantic. They've got some American private equity partners with that, but for $55 billion. That is so much money. It's going to make it the largest leveraged buyout in history. Alyssa, aside from profit, why would Saudi Arabia want to sort of get into the largest hub for gaming and esports?
I mean, it's a cultural thing, like we've been saying. It's getting into gaming, which I have spoken about a lot, and I believe on this show, that gaming is so tied to pop culture and politics, especially in the West, that you now have a through line to a very large community of people. I mean, the Esports World Cup was just held there a month or two ago that had, again, an obscene prize pool. It was a flashy, over the top celebration. You know, they cut out an entire scene from one of the like opening reels where an esports CEO said that they were gay, and there were an entire group of GeoGuessr community map makers who boycotted it. You know, there is some tension there, but there is by and large a very large community of people who play video games who there are corners of them that are also incredibly reactionary, that are very plugged into the internet and online culture, that will consistently be a well for you to mine money from. And EA is one of those companies that has always understood that with its approach towards making games. They know how to make games that people will keep spending money on. And I think for a country like Saudi Arabia, that's a no-brainer company to get involved in.
Okay, I want to come back to that idea of like cutting out the reference to being gay from that reel, because I think that is important, because really it's a conversation about concessions. What concessions are you willing to make to allow, you know, Saudi Arabia money to sort of be a part of your ecosystem? But before I get there, Shireen, this is being called a really big win for Saudi Arabia's big sort of soft power strategy. Why do you think, in your view, what makes Electronic Arts like this valuable acquisition for them?
Well, first of all, it's global participation. It's extremely accessible. It brings in a new demographic of people because largely the biggest participants, I don't have the numbers in front of me, I would say under 40 who are gamers. And so that's attracting. And you see that part and parcel at the same time as you see this tourism, Saudi Arabia. Like they had Lionel Messi marching through the desert, and now they've got these beautiful Maldives-esque looking huts that are like beautiful. So now you see influencers going to Saudi Arabia. And I'm like, this is very not without my daughter kind of, which is how we were presented with Saudi Arabia. So it's really a change of entire narrative of the place. So they're not only soft powering and laugh washing, they're literally rebranding their entire image, and EA will like help them do that. It's like you said, one of the biggest acquisitions that's not sports, like direct, like sports, active sports in that way. It's not gambling, it's not alcohol. They're like, oh, it's video games, it's fine. But it also breeds subcultures as well. And to have a hand on that and control, all of this is about power and control.
It's worth mentioning, you know, EA makes some of the biggest games on the planet. You know, we're talking about like NFL, soccer games, Battlefield, Sims. Like at the end of the day, Alyssa, when we think about how large a company EA is, you know, and how influential a company EA is, we start to get into that idea of, okay, what concessions are you willing to make? Comedians, there was this reported, you know, document that went around being like, hey, if you're gonna come perform in Saudi Arabia, these are the sort of things you can't really say on stage. Those are concessions you're willing to make in order to sort of accept that check. In terms of gamers, how are they reacting to the concessions that one might have to make to Saudi Arabia being involved in EA Sports or EA?
I think this is it's a really fascinating bifurcation that really showcases the huge divide in the world of gaming, right? I think that gamers who understand the industry and the actual potential future of video games as an industry, as an art form, they hate this. They hate this because this is indicative of continuous hoovering up of smaller companies by large companies, which isn't good for the health of the industry. It's not good for the people who work for it. EA has focused for years on live service games that can milk gamers for profit consistently to the detriment of players, developers, and gamers alike. They've laid off more than 2,600 people in the last 4 years. Wow. All while their CEO has made 20 plus million, 18 plus million, that same CEO who will still be in charge if this deal goes through.
Alyssa, and I'm sure, weren't they voted the worst company to work for in America twice?
Wow.
I believe so, but they also love to do LGBTQ stuff so that we don't look at that. But who knows if that'll keep happening. But what's really interesting is that Andrew Wilson, who will remain CEO if this goes in place, years ago, probably 2021-ish, was told by shareholders that actually he had made too much money and we're going to rein that in going forward. What happens when he no longer has shareholders to hold him accountable? Because he won't once this deal goes from public to private. And this deal also importantly involves debt, which EA will take on. And they've already said they're really looking into using AI as ways to make video games going forward. They already have a clear penchant for laying off people, closing entire studios, shutting down games that were in production. They canceled the Black Panther game that was in the midst of production just a few months ago, closed the whole studio. So that doesn't sound good for anyone working there. But the other side of this coin that's really interesting is you have the right-leaning reactionary gamers who are incredibly excited about this because they think that the PIF will influence the content of these games. And EA does, aside from its sports games, make games like The Sims, Mass Effect, and BioWare, which all have incredibly queer characters, themes, and players. And you have these reactionary right-wing gamers who are like, oh, you're going to take the gay stuff out of my games now. I'm super into this. This is good for us.
I just want to clarify, PIF, that's a public investment fund. That's a Saudi Arabia
Correct.
arm that sort of has all these public investments. But Alyssa, is that a realistic concern? Do you hear that and say, you know what, the content of the games, yeah, they realistically could be affected now that, Saudi Arabia is involved in EA?
I mean, we don't know how much power they're going to exert, but they will have a majority in investment in this. And combined with Jared Kushner's firm, which they have also shared money with, you now have two different countries with two different right-leaning conservative leaders behind a video game studio. I think if you look at when the UFC women earlier in this year fought for the first time in Saudi Arabia, the kits that they had to wear that were different than the traditional kits to be more demure and in line with the country's beliefs is indicative of how that can affect things. There's conversations about what the WWE women are going to be able to wear when this happens.
That's right.
I think if that's happening on a sports level, and that's literally an athlete, a professional athlete being told you have to wear something, which I would argue affects the way that you fight or the way that you play if it's a different uniform than you're used to wearing. I don't think it's completely unrealistic to think that a company like EA, which many people believe has sort of done the queer stuff in some avenues just to kind of, oh, look, we did it. Rainbow washing. We're here. We love you guys. Anyway, I took home $28 million and fired 600 people this year. But that doesn't really matter because we have a rainbow flag emoji this month. So we're totally cool with that. I think it's not unrealistic at all. And I think timing this with a reactionary right-wing uprising again in the game industry that is consistently getting more and more kind of rabid over the last year, I think it's not a good sign to what could happen. A lot of people who are big fans of, myself included, Mass Effect is my favorite game of all time. Yeah. I worry that Mass Effect 4, which is in development, just might not happen.
Shireen, I think the danger becomes too narrowly focusing on the idea that Saudi Arabia, those are the bad guys, and therefore there's no bad guys that exist anywhere else. What do we miss if we focus on Saudi Arabia and say the problem is that, and we should be worried about that? What do we end up missing from that lens, you think?
So I'm not saying they're not bad guys. Let's just be really clear
of course,
about
I can hear that.
But I'm also a strong believer that everyone's a bad guy in some capacity. And when you're talking about this much money, when you're talking about this kind of control exerted through governmental ways or societal ways, there are bad guys. I mean, one of the things, just jumping back to what Dave Chappelle did by going, which I find really interesting, is it was a basic FU to the United States to say it's easier for me to talk here because I'm censored there as well. So he's also criticizing at the same time America, which right now, look at Jimmy Kimmel. There's silencing there. Look at what happened there and look at the way that people stood up for that, which is important. But let's not pretend that femicide or you can't even get access to healthcare, reproductive rights if you're a woman in the United States. No one will ever be able to convince me that you have a great shot at life as a woman in the United States.
I mean, Roe v. Wade recently being overturned.
Exactly.
The reproductive rights are clearly in a retreat in a lot of different places in the United States.
I mean, Margaret Atwood is becoming seriously relevant to the culture of the United States. I mean, you could argue that. And I mean, I think one of the things is in terms of Saudi Arabia, the critiques of this, and I'm in sports, I heard this similarly when Qatar got the World Cup in 2022. And before that, the criticisms, however, I'm looking at who they come from. I'm not saying there's no merit, but a lot of them are steeped in anti-Arab and anti-Muslim sentiment. And just to point over there and be like, they're bad, they're really bad. Yeah, of course they're bad. But yeah, there's a lot of other bad people around. If we're talking about anti-queer sentiment. So was Russia during the World Cup, and the type of criticism that was levied was absolutely different than it was in Saudi Arabia. And I'm not saying
for the same thing.
And I feel like I'm not saying it's not bad. I keep repeating this because people will be like, "Oh my God, you love Saudi Arabia." Really, that's not the takeaway here.
Yeah.
But the issue is, I think there's absolute merit into that criticism.
Yeah.
But is it being evenly applied? No.
I want to pause here and say goodbye to our radio audience because I think there's more to talk about. But I just want to say for the folks listening on the radio, my name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. The show is called Commotion, and there's going to be more of this conversation in wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, Alyssa, I want to pick this up exactly where Shireen sort of left it, this idea of, when we levy these criticisms against Saudi Arabia, as we were having this conversation, it becomes a little too easy, right? To sort of say, like, the problem is there, the problem is not here. And I feel like this is maybe the fifth conversation we've had you on where you're like, hey, should we talk about fascism in culture? And so let's do it again. What do we end up missing if we sort of like only characterize these criticisms as having to do with Saudi Arabia uniquely, as opposed to saying, there's got to be something with the way that commerce and art interact, and we're maybe losing some of the rights that we used to have.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to point in an Arab country and say, look at all the human rights violations there, and that's bad, when it's happening in our backyard and in our front yard and online and everywhere. I think it's super Dave Chappelle, I will give him credit. I have major issues with that man, specifically for the conversations he's had about trans folks. But pointing to that is an incredibly important and cogent thing. I was on here last to talk about Jimmy Kimmel getting canceled because he made a joke that Trump didn't like. And then he wielded the FCC to threaten and, you guys are about to do a really big buyout and we have to approve it. And man, I really don't like what Jimmy Kimmel said. And gosh, I just wish somebody would do something. I mean, it's like goons from 1920s Italian mobster type stuff. Like I sure wish this guy would take a walk down to the river, and then all of a sudden he takes a walk down to the river. Like, it's happening here, and I think it's
Thank
really
you for the
easy
impression. That was great. Yep.
Thank you. I'm from New York, Come on, I'm Italian.
Yeah.
It's sorry, Gramps. I think it's happening here. And maybe it's not as obvious because Americans are so unwilling to believe that the country that fought for its own freedom, but then subjugated Black people to slavery and still mistreat brown people and are now disappearing Latino immigrants would ever do something similar to a scary brown country across the way. That's exactly what's happening here. It's just not as obvious or not as reported on as consistently. Like, we are disappearing people. We are deporting journalists that are from other countries. So maybe you're not executing them, but you're sending them to essentially a work camp in El Salvador after they reported negatively about ICE. It's very similar, and it's very much not covered the same way.
To bring it home, as a visibly Muslim woman, I don't want to go to Saudi because I've been critical publicly of their sport washing. I also have absolutely no interest in going to the United States. I feel equally unsafe in both places. So I'm really not going anywhere. Thank you for having me. But also,
we're going to the mall.
We're going to go to the mall.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is important to have in the conversation are the partnerships of people who are buying in to this type of hypocrisy. Like the fact that the WTA, the Women's Tennis Association, who were stalwarts in getting gender equity and pay equity in the history of sport, was tennis. Billie Jean King is everyone's fairy godmother in sport.
Yeah.
The WTA have a tournament in Saudi Arabia. Like, you're like, how is this happening? You are literally, for a gay woman back then, to be advocating for equal payment is amazing, but you're going to go to Saudi. Like, what kind of message is that giving? It's like seriously confusing. It's deeply complex. And then like the covers, like, listen, I want to see Coco Gauff in a strapless gown in front of this beautiful type of hut, this Eastern looking architecture. It's absolutely gorgeous. Yeah. But at the same time, I'm like, wait a minute, Coco, let's have a conversation about what's happening deeper than that. This isn't about principle. It's about the money. And I think at one time we were comfortable trying to pretend like those things could coexist. I actually really don't think they can coexist anymore. We're at a stage they can't.
Well, maybe let's leave it here. Because you've been reporting on this for a long time, right? You sort of talked about this idea of Saudi sport washing. And this is not a story that is like new to you. You've been reporting on this for a long time. But it's in so many arenas that it's worth noting, right? There's F1, you mentioned tennis, right? We've talked about wrestling, we talked about esports. They bought a bunch of soccer teams in order to just have a foothold in some of the largest leagues around the world. Every year you hear a story about how they're courting some of the biggest players on the planet and paying them more money than entire leagues can afford. Ronaldo obviously is the biggest name to sort of go over to Saudi Arabia. But then when we think about this idea of sport washing, I can imagine somebody listening to this and say, how could that possibly overwrite, the human rights abuses, the stories that we hear? But does it work? Does sport washing actually end up, directing attention away from the things that, they might want attention to be directed away from?
Yes, and the reason is it's because of the participants that I was telling you about. One of the things that a lot of people don't know is that Saudi has a women's Premier League. It's their 4th season. They are investing money, and it's layered and complicated for me personally because as someone who has covered women's sports globally, there are still places in this world that do not accept women in their entirety. And Alyssa, you talked about women choosing what they want to wear. There's still a fight in France for women who are not allowed to participate in sport if they wear hijab. So there is a player named Lina Boussaha, who's French national, made Les Bleus, the national camp. She wasn't allowed. She wanted to wear a headscarf. They said no. So she said, forget you. I'm going to go represent Algeria because I have ties there. And I'm going to go play professionally in Saudi where they will give me money and I can pursue a very successful career. We're seeing some of the top names in women's football right now go to Saudi. In fact, former Canadian national player Cara Moscato is now coaching Al Qadsiya there now, their team. So, and she's an openly gay woman, a coach. So it's wait a minute, who's participating in this? Yes, maybe coaches and women coaches in particular, because the numbers are very low globally, don't have the opportunities in other markets, so they go there. So this is very effective when it comes to women's sports. They just started driving in Saudi 5 years ago, and suddenly there's a professional women's league. It's the rate at which I'm wow, this is fast because they have the money. Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. are co-hosting a World Cup because none of them can afford to do it individually, literally. But
that's
Saudi,
next year,
yeah, but Saudi can afford to do all of these things, and that's why it's effective because people are looking in the sports world for global opportunities, and they're going to get them there.
I was skeptical of the idea of sport washing, and then when they paid Ronaldo, I don't know, I assume $1 trillion to go over to the Saudi League, it suddenly kind of dawned on me that there are people who are like, what am I going to do? Not watch Ronaldo? And I have a very easy time not watching Ronaldo. Not my guy, but that's neither here nor there. But there are people who are like, yeah, I'm in, I'm on board. I will watch those games, and it's literally that subtle and that easy. That is how something like sport washing, laugh washing, game washing, that's sort of how all those concepts sort of begin to take root. I appreciate you guys being on the show today. I appreciate you taking us through this. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Shireen Ahmed is a senior contributor with CBC Sports. She also teaches sports journalism at Toronto Metropolitan University. She's a pride of Halifax, Nova Scotia. Alyssa Mercante is a video game and internet culture journalist. She's based in New York City, the pride of 1920s Italian mobsters, I assume. The Riyadh Comedy Festival is on right now. It's happening until October 9th in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We'll see you tomorrow.